You're most welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. At the tail end of last week, we lost Ghana's longest finance minister, Professor Kwesi Botchwey. I'll allow a few minutes to make a comment on that.
Well, I think the reported loss of Professor Kwesi Botchwey is a great loss to not just his family, which must be his biological family, and of course then his political family, the NDC, but also the nation of Ghana, which he served very diligently for many years, first as a law lecturer and professor, and also as a member of the PNDC and minister or PNDC Secretary for Finance. And of course, he held many other positions following his exit from government in the international arena, where he worked with highly regarded professors and institutions, including the World Bank, the IMF, the United Nations, and so forth. So it's a loss to the global community and also a loss to Africa leadership because of his mindset and the mindset that allowed him to serve Jerry John Rawlings and the PNDC very faithfully. It was an era in which there was very little abuse of office in terms of personal interest overriding the national interest. Of course, there would have been corruption of all kinds at any stage in Ghana's existence, but this was a period that I think will be remarkable when historians get to it, at a time when the finances of the country, meager as it was managed a lot more diligently, more competently, more carefully. There was very little waste and abuse of office, and that is the record that I'm sure future generations will come to know of him and of the governance that he helped to establish. So we will all miss him dearly. The office that you are sitting in is only about 100 meters from his office. So we've had opportunities for me to visit him in his office and also to visit him in his home. And we shared many experiences and thoughts together. So it's a shame to learn that he should leave so quickly, so prematurely. There's a man who could and should have lived to at least another 10 or more years. But God has his own way, and we have had to accept the outcome of his decisions, the Almighty. Yeah.
His demise comes at a time Ghana is facing economic challenges. Are you surprised that he has left at this time? How do we carry on his legacy?
Well, I think what you must ask is that why would people like Kwesi Botchwey be in existence and their knowledge not be tapped into at a time when Ghana is facing crisis? I believe that's the question you may be asking. And I think that is a question that goes straight to the heart of one of the major problems of our country, that we are unable and unwilling to tap into the knowledge, the expertise, the experience of a whole range of our own nationals and even Ghanaians who are in the diaspora, who are still happy and willing to often give 100% free, unencumbered advice or support or assistance to many national endeavors. So the fact that Professor Kwesi Botchwey was alive in Ghana was, I'm sure, perfectly happy to be supportive if there was a forum in which his knowledge and his expertise could have been tapped, especially when you're talking about we are going to the IMF. Nobody has gone to the IMF more often than Kwesi Botchwey did in Ghana's history. So if we wanted to learn anything, the do's and don'ts of working with the IMF, he could have given a free lecture on that. But this is a...
You think we have missed the opportunity to tap his expertise?
Not only his expertise, I'm talking broadly beyond Dr. Botchwey, that we as a people are unable and unwilling. The words are unable and unwilling to tap into the expertise of many other people, many other professionals, many other former appointees of either political party, those who have not even served in government before, who are just in the private sector, who are just scientists, eminent scientists. If you did a roll call of eminent Ghanaian scientists, including people who have won accolades international, like the Internet Hall of Fame, or those who have invented the fiber optic cable, or those who have been part of National Aeronautic Space Administration. They all exist, and they're in Australia, they're in Germany, they're in Britain, they're in USA, and they're in Ghana also. But the system does not know how to identify them and use them. There was a time, as you know, when Kwame Nkrumah had the Encyclopedia Africana project, which has always been part of the Ministry of Education. It was supposed to be a treasure trove of knowledge. And as you know, now that we are in the information age or a knowledge age, people focus on the per capita incomes of countries. How much income does a country have, GDP, growth, all these economic metrics, metrics or measurements. But the per capita knowledge, how much knowledge exists in a country per capita, per each individual, is actually a more significant and important measure of how that country mobilizes its total knowledge for its own and its neighbors' advancement. And this is something that is lacking in the Ghanaian cultural, political, and social system.
Doc, the international rating agencies, Fitch, Bloomberg, and S&P Global they have downgraded Ghana. Government is of the view that those downgrades does not reflect what is happening in Ghana. Do you hold that view?
Well, that's a very funny situation, because, and I have to speak now as a former official of both the World Bank Group, where I worked at the International Finance Corporation, and also of the African Development Bank Group. And in both institutions, those institutions rate and take their ratings very, very seriously. They don't joke with their ratings at all. They are all AAA rated financial institutions, because they know what the value of the rating does. And I think anybody who works in finance, and especially in the Ministry of Finance, would also know within a few days of working there how those ratings, if you are downgraded, the cost of capital to your country, just by being downgraded from A, AAA to B, BBB, C, and D, and so forth, it's humongous. It's a huge amount of cost. And maybe there's probably never been a proper analysis, which is actually a very good subject for anybody listening to me who is studying economics or finance and needs a subject matter to research for his, MPhil degree or PhD. Do some analysis on the ratings that Ghana has had over the period that we have been rated, at least 20 to 25 years, and try and see and try and do a measurement of the impact of the ratings that we have had on the progress of the economy. You will see certain interesting correlations. So people will then see, I see, when you are downgraded, it actually costs you money. We are now in a situation where, based on the downgrades and the accumulation of debt, depending on what estimates you believe, every newborn child in Ghana starts life owing at least 20,000 cedis of debt. At the time of birth, we are all debtors. I mean, Ghana is a debtor nation. It's not a crime to be a debtor nation. Even the United States is one of the world's largest or the world's biggest debtor nation. So yes, many countries go into debt at one time or the other, and it depends on what took you into the debt and what will bring you out of the debt. But in the case of Ghana, which is a developing country and which has a lot of assets that we are, frittering away and allowing other people, both Ghanaians and non-Ghanaians, to misuse and abuse. I'm sure we'll be talking about our gold resources and water resources and other resources in due course. But we have the rating agencies are simply to give us discipline in terms of how we manage our resources. And remember that the rating agencies are not there to rate only governments. Rating agencies are credit rating agencies. They start with personal credit. Actually, those of us who have lived in the United States, one of the first things anybody who lives in the United States gets to know is his own or her own credit rating. Everybody has a credit rating. You get a credit report. You should try and buy a car or try and buy a house. These are things that require medium to longer term debt. And the first thing that the car salesperson does or the real estate agent does is to go and get your credit report, you, the individual. So you have credit rating agencies for human beings. Their credit reports. Then you have credit rating agencies, the same ones, Fitch, Moody's, etc. They have credit rating for companies and other institutions. Like I was saying, African Development Bank is not a company, it's an institution, but it's rated. The World Bank itself is rated. So it's not as if only Ghana is rated and they are abusing us or insulting us with the rating. Human beings get rated in most advanced countries.
So the rating
and governments also get rated.
So the ratings
It
reflects
reflects your financial behavior.
the situation in Ghana.
It reflects your financial behavior or misbehavior. It's as simple as that. If you behave well, the ratings will tell that you're behaving well. If you behave poorly, the ratings will tell you that you're behaving poorly. It's no different from the soccer matches that are taking place in FIFA. Those who play well will score goals and will move ahead. And those who don't play well will have goals scored against them and will fall behind.
All right. So the 2023 budget will be presented on Thursday by Ken Uforiana, the finance minister. I don't know what your expectations are.
Well, I think there's been a debate as to whether he should be presenting the budget or not. That is a matter for the government and for his president. I think there are members of his own party, NPP, who feel that he himself has lost so much credibility, not just in Ghana, but now internationally, because he has been, among other things, the chairman of the Development Committee, which is one of the highest positions that any civilian can hold within the World Bank and IMF group. So he's held very important positions, which has given him and Ghana some credibility at the time. Now that his credibility has fallen so low, I think his own party members and most people in Ghana are of the view that, look, his time is well spent. And we are not living in an island in Ghana. Ghanaians watch television, they listen to news about the United States, about India, Pakistan, and they hear that there's a finance minister who obviously, Kwarteng, who had originated from Ghana. And he became UK's finance minister, a very prestigious position. But because of certain actions, well, they call him the Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's a big word, but it's equivalent to a finance minister. But he did things that he himself acknowledged were wrong, and he resigned. So the impression created in Ghana that if a finance minister resigns, the whole world will collapse, or you cannot get a replacement for him, and he's the only person who can do the work, is rubbish. Complete rubbish. It should not exist at all. So if the president wants to keep him, sure, he can keep him. If the person himself, my friend, Ken ought to have resigned long ago in his own best interest. I don't know what his family is telling him. I don't know what his friends are telling him. Obviously, if he feels that he must regain his honor before he leaves office, it won't happen tomorrow. He can't regain his honor in the next 2 or 3 months. And it's unlikely to regain his honor in the next 1 year. And as long as people in his own party are opposed even to his reading the budget, and he may read it, and there's some arrangements or compromises they may come to, but I'm sure the opposition to him will continue to be in office as long as fuel prices are as high as they are, as long as food prices are as high as they are, as long as the spare parts and imports of all kinds in the shops are all very, very high. He is the symbol to many Ghanaians of the poor performance of the Akufo-Addo government. He is the symbol. And so if he were to ask me as a friend, I would also say, my friend, what have you got to lose? After all, according to himself and his president, he does not even take a salary. So most people are surprised that somebody who does not want to take a salary and says he's going to help the country. If the country says, my friend, thank you very much, we don't want you, he's still insisting that, no, I must help you by all means. I mean, what kind of help is that?
How do you compare his style of management to the past finance ministers we have? We had the late Professor Kwesi Botchwey, the Baredus, the Tekpes, and the Kobna Force. How different is his style?
Well, I'm not sure it's a matter of style. I prefer to deal with the substance than style. But if you start talking about style, then we want to know who wore white suits to Parliament and who will quote from the Bible in his speeches. I mean, so it's not really... Style may be a factor, but I think substance is more important. I would say that Mr. Bawiredu, Sir Tekpe, and Professor Kwesi Botchwey were very serious people. I mean, just by their personalities, if you get to know them. I think Mr. Ekwow, who is a friend, doesn't smile very easily because he's a very serious man, always serious. And Barry I knew from a distance. He attended a certain secondary school that my father, I believe, founded in the Achim, Konogo Massive, basically, secondary school. So I got to know that about him. But I think his departure was also premature. But he was known to be very diligent and very hardworking from those who were working close to him. Everyone has their style. Not everyone has organized. I'm sure it's the first time that a Kinke and Wache party was organized in the finance ministry. I don't know all the parties that have ever been organized, but it's in my memory of at least 30 years or 40 years of monitoring what is happening in the Ghana government. It's under Minister Kanufurata that I believe the finance ministry staff themselves enjoy the Kinke and Wache party. So you'll be remembered for many things.
Okay, so in terms of performance, will you say that
the performance is obvious. I'm saying it's like the question about the rating agencies. We will know your performance by your scores. So if you do well in A level or in the University of Ghana, people will know. If you don't do well also, it will be known. So if we hear that a president once had a third class in economics, it's also part of the person's record. If you also hear that you are having difficulty in balancing your books and you are continually in deficits, even though the countries in the neighborhood of Ghana, every time we hear the president and the finance minister and other MPP officials blaming COVID, number one, and then Russia-Ukraine war, number two, as the causes of most of Ghana's problems. And then most of the NDC and other neutral observers of Ghana's economy point out to the neighbors of Ghana and say, well, if we are all in the same world, and if Russia and Ukraine war is to affect every country's deficits and inflation rates and take them out of kilter, then how come that Ivory Coast, Togo, Benin, and other countries do not seem to suffer the same degree of problems? There are those who have pointed to the so-called allegations of conflict of interest in the fact that the finance minister and his colleague who has been dismissed benefited from the bonds that were raised through their various financial institutions. So there are many causes of the financial calamity in which we find ourselves. So yes, COVID is there, it's real, it's affected every country. Russia-Ukraine war is also real. Interest rates are high in many countries, that's also true. There are other economic factors that have affected the global community as a whole, but countries that have managed their economies well will do better even in difficult times. And since we don't know how bad anything will be at any point in time, since God doesn't really give any of us too much foreknowledge about ourselves, about our country, about our economy. So your job is to, if you have bought a car, your job is to take good care of that car. There will be accidents on the road, but if you are driving very carefully, you find that you have no accident history, even though there are people who have had accidents. So you see the accidents on the road, but your car is not having an accident because you, the driver, are taking care of your car. But when you have been given a car called Ghana, and you are driving it recklessly, and your president is flying in the most expensive planes at a time when his country is having the greatest difficulty, it's a mismatch that most people cannot understand. Because President Rawlings has died, and now Botchwey has died, let me just give you an example. When I became ambassador to the United States, I became aware that President Rawlings had not yet visited the United States. After being in office for more than 12 years, from 1991, 1992, to when I became ambassador in 1994, which is 12 years, he had never taken the time or trouble to come to the United States. Why? He was taking interest in his own country, about the developments in Ghana, saving money for the people. Because the presidential travel is one of the most expensive endeavors or adventures anybody can imagine. Presidential travel, very expensive. A president cannot travel by himself. He travels with an entourage. That's why most countries have a presidential plane. Some countries don't have it, but Ghana has at least one presidential plane. Sometimes we've had two. Sometimes both are functioning. Sometimes only one is functioning. But anytime the president travels, it's millions of dollars. Just the fact that the president is traveling. Whether he's going to Togo, Benin, and often to Dubai and to the Middle East and to France and Europe and America. And if you just calculate presidential travel for a president who likes to travel, so there are presidents who like to travel and presidents who don't really care to travel.
We are in a technological stage. You think the president can reduce some of his meetings to Zoom meetings?
Too many of those, and many presidents actually go to attend the United Nations by Zoom. President Rawlings didn't attend the United Nations for 12 years, even though every president is invited every single year. He will send Mr. D.M. Fanan, he will send Mr. P.V. Obeng, he will send the foreign minister to represent Ghana, because all those people can represent Ghana effectively. Even your ambassador, myself, when I was an ambassador, I could represent Ghana at many events. I myself was signing agreements with the World Bank and IMF, because that is the function of the ambassador of Ghana to the United States. So even the Minister of Finance does not have to come to the United States all the time, depending on the nature of the discussion. His ambassador there can represent him.
Doc, our debt is around 400 billion
and growing.
Ghana cedis, and we are still counting. To what extent are you worried about these debts?
No, I think I just mentioned in this course of an interview that the main effect of that debt, beyond the immediate impact on the prices in our country based on the rating agencies and the global phenomena that is affecting all of us, is the impact on the next generation. I'm saying a baby born today is born with debt hanging around his or her neck of somewhere in the region of 20,000 cedis per child. So that is the kind of debt, that overhang, that we don't want to encourage and we want to reduce. And the measures to reduce the debt are what you are talking about, which the president and the government of the day do not seem to have the slightest interest in doing. Cut down your government. You've heard that slogan so many times. People have demonstrated about it. What example can you give of an attempt to cut down the government? Because the president does not want particular individuals to lose their positions, because they see it as job for the boys and a chance to pillage the economy and to, chop and quench, as the Nigerians will call it. So he's keeping people in place. But the budget, the allocations to the ministries is what they claim they are cutting. So they are cutting 10%, 20%, 30% of ministries' budget, obviously the president's budget, but the human beings are there. But it's not the budget which causes the cost. It's the human beings which create the cost and which create the corruption. Because once people are in place, they will find ways to make up for the cuts that you are putting in place about their salaries. If you cut my salary by 20, 30%, I'm in government, that's how many people behave. They will find a way to make up for that cost by indulging in very negative and corrupt.
That creates corruption. Absolutely. Talking about corruption, investigative journalist Arimi Anas has dragged Ken Ofori-Atta and Edugwahin before Shraj. What's your view on that?
I think that was long overdue, partly because from what we are hearing, some of the videos that he took, including the one that had Edugwahin reportedly receiving some cash from some ostensible, Middle Eastern personalities. The video, I think, is still 4 years old. So I think the question most people will be asking is that if Anas has such evidence of misbehavior, why does he keep them for so long? Because you have allowed that person to misbehave for another 4 years and contributed to the debt that we are now all fighting for. So my only advice to him would be that if you come through your investigative journalism, you get information that is about people that should not be in place, then make sure that you come out with the information.
He should appreciate the urgency of time.
Yeah, he should appreciate the urgency of time and the impact of not acting quickly on the overall national position. I mean, I don't think he's doing it deliberately. I don't know all the factors that go into the editing and the publishing or not publishing, and National Theatre will either host the program on independence, what they call it, the Design Conference Center will host the program or not host it, all that funny thing that took place recently. I don't know all the details, but he, as the main personality behind these documentaries, must make an effort whenever the information in a documentary is such that the law enforcement agencies or the governance institutions such as Shraj must become aware of it and take their own separate actions, that they should not be denied access to the information so that they can act.
Look, with reference to the IMF bailout, government is doing negotiations with the IMF just to find out, can we secure a deal? From look of things, can we secure a deal before the year ends?
Not from my experience and from my knowledge. I worked at the IFC, International Finance Corporation, which is part of the group of institutions that the IMF is part of, being the Bretton Woods institutions. But I didn't work at the IMF. My good friend Ekwow is the one who worked at the IMF, and many other Ghanaians have also worked at the IMF. But basically, based on the rules that we know and the processes that we know and the number of countries that are applying to the IMF, and if you remember also that the attitude or the posture of our own finance minister, where he said numerous times, including one particular, whether it was a speech or an interview, about a week or two before the president insisted, and actually I believe wrote to him to proceed to the IMF, that we will never go to the IMF. Going to IMF would have dire consequences, etc. I won't quote him accurately, but I'm sure most people know the particular speech.
You think those statements were needless?
Well, it's not only a matter of needlessness, but they identify where his position is and where his mind is. And when somebody has told you that he doesn't believe in going to IMF and that it's not a good idea to go to IMF, and you are pushing him to the IMF, you know that he will not negotiate properly or in good faith because he doesn't believe in it.
How can we secure a good deal at the IMF?
By behaving ourselves. Because you can't secure a good deal in a vacuum. You are behaving a certain way and getting a good deal, with the IMF. It doesn't happen that way. The IMF has enough information. IMF has offices here. IMF has offices in Ghana. And the managing director is in Washington, but IMF has offices throughout the African continent. In fact, I had the opportunity when I was working at the IFC to have been asked by the IMF representative then for Africa to come with him, to help him, the IMF representative, to interact with African journalists to help IMF get a better reputation and image in Africa. Because the IFC had always a good reputation, because the IFC is mostly an investment banking type organization which does mostly projects in the private sector. But IMF deals with governments mostly, and also deals with governments who are often at the terminal stage of cancer, stage 1, 2, 3. So when you are at that terminal stage, when you are going to doctors, you are going to have very serious surgery. So you hear words like Ghana will have a haircut, or financial institutions will take a haircut. I mean, these are all terminologies that...
What's your view on the suggestions that the current finance minister should not be leading the negotiation at the IMF, based on statement he has made?
First of all, it's a decision any government must make as to who leads a government delegation to the IMF. You see, when you are the Minister of Finance and you have to swallow whatever your pride is and go to the IMF, in most cases, it's often not in your own interest to lead the delegation to the IMF. So let's take an example from President Mahama's era. At that time, Mr. Ekwow was the Minister of Finance. And as I've just said to you, he already had experience working at the IMF. So unlike most Ghanaians, he had that experience. In spite of that, when Ghana had to go to the IMF under President Mahama, President Mahama invited the same Professor Botchwey that we just talked about to lead the delegation to the IMF with Mr. Ekwow as a member. So that's a different approach, that we have to go to IMF anyway. We have a lot of very, experienced economists in the government of Ghana. You can actually produce a bipartisan team. If you want the whole country to go along with you to the IMF, you, the government, can easily establish a bipartisan team. That is a team made up of members of the two political parties, just as we have in Parliament. We have the recent commission on censure, or committee on censure, which was formed by the two parties, and we had a joint chairmanship. It worked. So if you are going to IMF, you can also have a joint committee if you wish, and you can convince NDC to also bring some people, and then you go to IMF. So the whole country knows that we are, as a country, at the IMF, Not MPP at the IMF, but the whole Ghana, because we all suffer together.
Looking at the kind of economy we have now, and with the hardship, can Ghana survive without the IMF?
Well, I mean, I think Armageddon is a big word, very long word, but it's Hades, it's hell, is the next option, because nobody wants to give you any credit. I mean, if you can create your own currency and it can be a crypto Ghana currency and it will work in the world, then fine, create that currency. But currently, as long as we are dependent on the US dollar as the main driver of our economy, and when that dollar is scarce, you can see what happens to exchange rates, and people are running helter-skelter. Dollar is scarce in Ghana. You're not going to change that in the near future. Of course, you may be aware of the effort by the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, and China, BRICS, which are trying to create their own counter institution to the IMF. So it's ongoing, and I'm sure they will succeed in doing so before the next 5 years is out. So before the next before 2030, there may be a bifurcated or at least a two-sided global financial order where some countries go to this BRICS institution that is probably based in Shanghai, and others go to the IMF. And some countries will belong to both if they can manage to belong to both. But until that time, the global financial architecture is governed and managed and operated through the United States as the world's financial, the most powerful country in the world. Let's make it that.
We must get a deal.
The World Bank and IMF. So there's no running around the IMF. If there was another place to go, we would have heard about it by now.
Doc, you were a former trade and industry minister. Yes, how do we stabilize the city? It seems to be the problem we are facing now.
Well, one of the tragedies that occurred after the Mahama administration left office and I also left office as Minister of Trade and Industry was one very not so well-known body, but which we thought had become somewhat better known, which was the Made in Ghana Committee, which was dissolved and abandoned by the Ekwow government. We were very surprised because the committee was not made up by political appointees. They were mostly by 2017. I created it and launched it. The president was very supportive of it. And we were having meetings in the Ministry of Trade and Industry. But the membership was drawn from such bodies as the Chartered Institute of Marketing Ghana, the Advertising Association of Ghana, the Institute of Public Relations, and other such brand and brand-related bodies who sent their representatives to that committee, which met regularly, at least once a month, to develop policies and programs to protect Ghana's trading position. Because the bottom line to the whole exchange rate issue, if you want to bring it to the simple facts, which many people have mentioned on radio and TV, so I'm not the first to mention it, it's obvious in economics, is that we don't produce and export as much as we import. So that creates an immediate imbalance of trade, your imports and exports and your revenues. And so you are constantly chasing dollars because you are not creating enough dollars yourself. And yet we have all the instruments for creating dollars. From your gold mines, you create dollars. From cocoa, you are supposed to create dollars. From your wood, you are supposed to create dollars. But there are many, many loopholes in almost all those systems which allow for most of our export revenue to vanish into the air. There are people who tell you that certain records in Dubai, in India, tell all of us that Ghana probably exported 5, 6, 7, or $8 billion worth of gold to the global market in the last few years. But official records will say 2 billion.
There are calls for the economic management team of this current government to be dissolved. I don't know what your view is.
I thought that it is the finance minister who is embattled, who should be the first to call for it to be dissolved. Or the vice president, Dr. Bawumia, who should call for it to be dissolved. Because it has not performed. In fact, nobody hears much about what that economic management team is doing or saying about this time of crisis. Because it's a time of crisis where if they were effective, they would have called their so-called famous press conferences and told us something interesting, something unusual, some new measures they are coming with. But there's nothing, it's an empty barrel. So there's nothing there. And there's a famous video of Dr. Bawumia mentioning the names of the economic management team, Dr. John Barfor, Dr. Akufo-Addo. I mean, some very, interesting. Well, these are eminent people. I don't say anything about them individually, but collectively, whether because they were sidelined, which happens many times in our country, where an economic management team or a group of that nature has been bypassed by the Ministry of Finance. Because if the president decides to listen to a Minister of Finance alone and sidelines the Bawumia economic management team, of which the Minister of Finance is a member, they may be having meetings which go nowhere. They may be having meetings that never bring papers to the cabinet. And so Dr. Bawumia will probably be a frustrated person, but he can't say anything. And instead, the finance minister has all the powers because he approves and signs checks. And
if that happens, if that happens, you could have left. If as an individual you think your views are not being respected, the best thing is to leave.
Who are you talking about?
I'm talking about the economic management team members. If
such as Dr. Bawumia, yes, the man who wants to be president, he will leave and go where? You see, because people have all their political agendas, okay, so their hands are tied. They have to sit there. In any case, you're an appointee of the president. So if you don't want a job, then you discuss with the president, and if he thinks somebody else should replace you, then he will. But most likely, since he has been painted as the wonder kind or the wonder kid of the MPP who can perform all kinds of magic, lock inflation up and give it to the IGP, lock interest rates up and give it to the IGP. He locks things up and gives it to the IGP. But when the key that he has given to IGP, people are looking for it, they can't find it.
On the scale of 1 to 10, how do you score the economy under this government since 2017?
Oh, I think it's an unfair question. Okay. I mean, how would you score that yourself?
Well, I'm asking.
I know you're asking, but on a scale of what, 1 to 10, yeah, where 10 is the highest, yes, it will be very difficult for them to go above 2.
Oh, okay.
They can't go beyond 2. It's very I won't say 0. I won't say 1, because they've done something. Right. But it can't go beyond 2 or 3, unfortunately. Just because of this year. Maybe last year, before COVID, there were 4, 5, 6 at different times. So, but the last few months, actually, with the depreciation of the cedi, they are now in the 1, 2, 3 range.
That would be less than 30%.
That's what I'm talking about. And they will score themselves the same way. The MPP MPs who are asking the Minister of Finance not to come to the chamber to attempt to deliver the state of the economy or the national budget, how do you think they will rank it?
Doc, I know you value integrity. How will you score this government on corruption?
In the same range, 2, 3 maximum.
On the scale of 1 to 10?
1 to 10. I mean, I don't want to make it 0. But you see, you are the journalists who have shown Ghanaians numerous videos and films and debates about our water bodies. Just to give one area of general concern. The whole world went to a climate conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, only last week, and some are still there doing some last-minute activities. But the evidence of how our natural resources are being misused and misapplied can be seen in at least 2 examples. One, in the example of a certain person that was appointed to be in charge of our forestry and who died maybe last year or not too long ago and managed to leave, I think, over 100 assets or properties to family members. Yes. Some of those assets, many of the assets, could be determined as national property. But he had privatized it and given it to his family. And it is routine in the MPP. This is how MPP behave. And it's since Kwame Nkrumah's time. You see, so Nkrumah came to build, MPP always come to destroy. Rawlings came to build, MPP came and destroyed. Mahama came to build, MPP come and destroy. So that has been the history of Ghana. So those who haven't studied Ghana's history will see that correlation that we have periods of great growth and advancement and then periods of considerable, retreat. And it's because of the state of mind of the leaders of the NPP and the family of, the friends and family governments that they like to establish. When the Sri Lankan government was overthrown, Rajapaksa, who was the president, who had almost 20 members of his family members in the government, it was similar to what was happening in Ghana. And that's why the president cannot sack people, because his own family members are everywhere. So it's very difficult to sack your cousin, your nephew, your uncle, or whatever, whoever they are, who are in those positions only because they are your relatives. They may also be educated, they may also be smart, they may be this, may be that, but you can get 50 other people who also have better or similar qualifications in Ghana who could do the work. But once you personalize and, infiltrate the public sector with family members to that extent, you really compromise yourself. Because every other appointee knows that, but so and so is in this sector, in that position, or a president, not down for a president in our first year and so forth. Why should I also restrain myself where I am? I must chop and quench more than the former general secretary of the MPP, who was sent to Forestry Commission and misbehaved. That is their standard of measure of how people should behave in the public sector. But if you watch Kwame Nkrumah, who MPP or their forefathers complained about, and when Kwame Nkrumah left office, nobody in Ghana today can show 1 square meter of land, one, that belongs to Kwame Nkrumah or his family members.
Will you say that?
Same for Rawlings.
Will you say that some of these things are getting worse because the president is not ready to reshuffle, for instance? So he appoints ministers; they continue to be there.
Well, the ministers under President Ekwow are probably the longest serving on average of any ministers either in Ghana's history or in recent history. Almost all of them, or many of them, have been in their positions for 6 years, or nearly 6 years, at least since they were appointed. There was a small cabinet, there was a small reshuffle between government 1 and 2, that is under Ekwow. But generally speaking, many have stayed in defense, in trade and industry, in finance, in communications, in quite a number of positions. The same person has been there. And the longer people stay in office, the more the likelihood that they will attempt to do illegal things, because they believe they are so powerful. They believe they are untouchable.
He said his ministers have performed well, so they should be there. The question is, what indicators is he measuring?
Well, I thought this is the question you would ask him. One of your colleagues should be asking that question of him, because nobody seems to know the indicators of measurement. The only indicator of measurement we can see are abuse of office, corruption, indiscipline, and misuse. I mean, the president is still traveling in convoys of 40 vehicles and more. A country that you are telling the whole world is poor and should get help. You are talking to the Japanese, asking them for help. You are talking to the British, asking them for help. Meantime, the British ambassador sits in economy class when he's traveling. High Commissioner of Britain, that's their practice. He sits in economy class. So when you are going there, flying in a private jet and asking him for British support, he can only laugh when he gets back to his office. In fact, he can laugh with you over the wine or over beer or whatever you are drinking or coffee, because it's a diplomatic laughter. But in his head, he's wondering what is wrong with these characters.
Do you think it is not too late he should cut down the government size?
Well, he will be asked to cut the government size as often as people have the opportunity to say something to him, and he will also continue to stick with whatever he believes in until he either leaves office, resigns from office, is removed from office, or the government comes to an end.
Doc, you play a critical role in the reintroduction of the value-added tax. We have something similar called e-levy. There are those who suggest that the e-levy should be cancelled and that it has failed. What's your view on that?
Well, the similarity in what you are talking about with the value-added tax, which I had the privilege to help to chaperone, when a previous attempt by the same NDC government under Rawlings in 1995, actually under Professor Botchwey, had failed. And we had no problems in us admitting that it had failed. One of the problems in life is when you fail at doing something, you fail to score a goal, you fail to win a match, you fail in an examination, and you are willing to accept it. Then you are bound to fail again because you are not willing to accept your own failures anyway. So President Rawlings accepted that this hasn't worked. And he suspended the whole value-added tax program in 1995. When I became Minister of Communication in 1997, he said, look, Chief, there's this project that we have called value-added tax. I'm sure you know about it. And we tried it and didn't work. But people say you know something about communication. You're an expert in it. So find a way to convince these Ghanaians that value-added tax is good. I want that to be one of your major objectives. So actually, for the 18 months I spent at the Ministry of Communication, that was my main task, to convince Ghanaians that VAT is good. President Mahama was working with me. We had a whole team of communication practitioners who worked with us. And we were able to convince Ghanaians over an 18-month period that value-added tax actually is good. And in fact, for businessmen who needed to hear why it is good for them, the message to them was that, do you know that VAT actually allows you, a business person, to sell goods and services and keep the income for as much as 30 to 45 days before you are required to report it or to release it to government. So that's like credit that has been advanced to you in large quantity, depending on how big your business is. Businessmen say, wow. So these were hidden benefits of VAT that, if you're not a communication professional, you will not identify as something to promote and let people change their minds based on that. So when VAT came back in 1998, December or whatever, there was not a pin which dropped in Ghana. Everybody had understood the VAT, and it was allowed to come back at a lower rate, which was also an important factor. So the e-levy may have to come back because electronic transactions are an important and growing part of any economy. And if there are taxes that or levies that must be imposed to give the economy some breathing room, then so be it. But the question is that what aspect of the transactions will you be taxing? And at what rate will you be taxing it? And what amount of revenue do you need to generate? I think the MPP government was too ambitious in trying to generate 6.5 billion in the first year through that e-levy. And then they had not educated anybody to the extent that we did. We took 18 months. Remember, people misunderstand how much people need to understand in communication. People think we had a press conference, so people have understood. Oh, we issued a press release. Oh, they have understood. I was on TV the other day and I talked about it. People have understood. No. Communication takes a long time.
You think they should cancel and go back to the drawing board?
Well, the methodology that they will use is up to them. But I'm saying that it can be retained or brought back in one form or the other. But they will have to define the parameters of how it was brought back or how it is brought back. I've given you the NDC example. Rawlings cancelled it. He suspended it. 3 years, no VAT. When I became minister, he said public education should come first. So Minister of Education come up with a program.
That could be a good example they can learn from.
They were there, but they were all there. All the people. President Akufo-Addo is the one who organized the Kumi Preko demonstrations in 1995. The president himself, current president, he organized the Kumi Preko. This is anti-VAT demonstrations, which led to suspension of VAT. So he knows more about it than anybody else. So we can't teach him any lessons in that respect.
In 2 minutes, what's your view on Akufo-Addo's Galamsey fight?
Oh, is there a fight for Galamsey? Or is it rather a raid of our natural resources, our gold resources, our river bodies, and with the chiefs and other very important people all playing roles, district chief executives, police officers, military officers. I mean, the whole thing has become a looting brigade process. I don't think there's any fight. If there's any fight, it's against the natural resources of Ghana. The fight is against our natural resources, not a fight against Galamsey or people who are misbehaving. Aisha Huang, who are her defenders in court? Have you noticed the people who are defending her? The Chinese woman. Who are some of them? Journalists can't talk, right? They can
only ask questions. Yes.
Sometimes journalists.
So maybe Doc has the answer. Yes.
You listen to some of your colleagues on national television, even your station, TV station. Yes. Some of them have 30 minutes or 1 hour of literally sermons talking about various things.
There are suggestions that the chiefs should be consulted before licenses of mining concessions are issued.
I think they are. I can't say. I used to be Minister of Mines and Energy for a period. So I believe that stakeholder consultation, is a requirement for any licensing process. And I believe chiefs and communities are part of the whole process by which a person who has applied for a mineral license or a mineral development license, there are different stages of the licensing. But there are many stages at which public consultation is required and community consultation is required. But if that's not taking place, then that's another area that can be fixed.
With reference to 2024, what should we expect from Doc?
Well, I'll be campaigning very strongly and aggressively on behalf of the NDC. And of course, we are only just about to enter our national electoral process where our national executives will be elected. We've done our branch, our constituency and regional elections. We are now going to our national elections where the chairman, the vice chairman, general secretary and others, national organizer will be up for elections. And then we'll get to the flag bearer stage where we will elect our leader for the elections. And in all those stages, I hope to be active to the best of my ability and to campaign for individuals and for causes. I'm interested not just in the individuals, but in those who show a certain behavioral attitude that will bring us into governance. Because the governance we have now, I think, has gone to the dogs, and we need to rescue Ghana. So I think the, various demonstrations have had a rescue Ghana type, attitude, and we should continue that effort.
Do you think there are internal wranglings in the opposition that needs to be fixed? Your party?
There'll be what you may call wranglings. Any two people don't necessarily agree. Even twins have disagreements. So if people don't see eye to eye in any organization, political, religious, medical, family, it's normal.
So you see your general secretary now contesting for chairmanship, the chairman contesting for chairmanship for 2024, and there are those who suggest that this may create problems.
Both have a right to the positions that they want to seek. Otherwise, one of them would have been disqualified. So as long as the Council of Elders and others have seen fit that they should both campaign, there's a matter of the manner in which they campaign. I mean, there must be less mudslinging and less name calling, and they should present their programs. When I was campaigning for office, I usually present a program in writing, on television, radio and things, so people know what they get when and if they choose me for whatever the positions that I may have been campaigning for. So I will urge all those who are running for office, focus on your programs. What will you do differently from your competitors when and if you are elected into office? If you become national chairman, if you become general secretary, if you become this or that, what will you do differently? And I think that's what will really get the electorate to vote for you. But we are aware of money crazy also as a factor, but there are all of us who keep crying against the monetization of politics and elections. So I hope that money will not find its way to victory, and that even if people have to be incentivized in minor ways for transportation and other things, the main decision will be about the competency and the effectiveness of the candidates.
How do you assess freedom of speech under this current government since 2017?
Well, there haven't been too many governments under which journalists have been killed, and no attempts are being made to find their murderers. So that's one of the greatest barometers of freedom of speech, using any criterion in the United Nations. Well, and even other victims of political campaign violence. I also was on election, the 2020 election, where people died. There have been no serious attempts to find their, murderers. And even in social circles where Takoradi girls got missing, and the person in charge gave the impression that we know where the Takoradi girls are, Where are the girls? The person gets promoted. The person who was sitting there at the time and making these statements actually has been promoted. So if you are in a country where such improper promotions take place, what do you think it does to the esprit de corps, to the morale of the police and the military and the law enforcement agencies when they see the wrong people being given appointments and promoted when they show that they shouldn't even be in office?
What's your view on the current judiciary and public confidence?
Well, I think there have been so many surveys that have depicted what the judiciary has become, unfortunately, and the fact that 22,000 cedis can get you freedom when you should be in the penitentiary. And when even 2,000 cedis can also lead to the murder of somebody. Because I think the murder of Ametuali has suggested, unless I misquote him, that he was offered or paid only 2,000 or 3,000 cedis. So that's how much it costs, that's how much the value of human life is for many people in Ghana. And so the attempts to depopulate the prisons is a good one. I don't know whether it is the judiciary themselves who are doing it or in association with some NGOs and so forth who feel that there are too many people in prison who shouldn't be there. The conditions of living in prisons must be a hell. If normal families, secondary schools are getting brown water as soup at a time when the economy is difficult and so-called free education is forcing them to be in boarding schools when they shouldn't be in boarding schools, and they should also be depopulated and changed for a different occasion, different conversation. Imagine what is happening to prisoners. How much is Gary today? How much is Banku? How much is fish? We can't get enough food to eat in our own homes. So prisoners must be dying in droves. But you see, when prisoners are dying, they die slowly. So Mr. Chosonso who died in prison today, the body will take it out. And Kwame has also died today, the body will be taken out. It's not like an accident.
So the judiciary has a lot to do.
Oh, yes, obviously. Judiciary has a lot to do to clean up their own image.
I've been speaking to Dr. Ekwow Spio-Garbrah. This has been national affairs where we put Ghana first. He has made a comment on several issues going forward. Thank you very much, Doc.
It's a pleasure. Have a good day. Okay. And greetings to your